So thank you, Clara. Thanks for inviting me to this wonderful place. I'm also sorry because probably my words will be disturbing in such a wonderful landscape. Now, my thinking is inspired by the question put by Clara about the relationship between economics and ethics, hence between ethics and aesthetics. These three poles are somehow seen as something that contradicts each other. They contradict each other, but they also have a dialogue. During these days, we've seen with the Brexit that economy is almost the only dimension of the narrative of our times, and this narrative deals with the crisis, economic crisis, which is coupled with crisis of values. Economics deal with the common good, but in a totally different way as compared to ethics. As to the word ethics, I'm referring to the meaning it had in the ancient world, in particular in Aristotle. Aristotle states that ethics derives from oikos, house, and more precisely, common house. Aristotle states that and specifies that ethics is all that uh, concerns a common heritage, not in the sense of assets, but in the sense of the enrichment of common life as the good of each and everybody. Again, this is not said in economic terms, but rather from the perspective of the importance, of the meaning of common life for man, which is not an addition or a choice, but it is what turns man into a political animal. In other words, not a political animal in the way we experience politics today, but in the sense that man is endowed with the faculty of language. Clara put this question uh, about what comes first, either language or thinking. Well, thinking defines not something which is abstract, but rather the atmosphere in which a man lives since his infancy, and it is also what describes. It's a bit like the notes of a symphony. It defines the form of life in which we express ourselves, live, and speak, express ourselves. A form of life, as Wittgenstein reminds us, and I should apologize with Professor Rumelin, he knows more about that than myself. And this meaning and the force of the form of life lies in the fact that we're familiar with the form of life we live in. So we think of this situation, today's situation, and let us think about what we've seen tonight and witnessed tonight with the decision made by Great Britain. Now, this form of life in which the economics dimension becomes decisive is a form of life we're not ready for, we're not prepared for. As if with the need of speaking global English, as if this need to speak English would imply that we know everything about economics, as if it was sufficient to go on the internet or watching the TV. By watching the TV, we take for granted that we know what GDP means, what spread means, what inflation means. But actually, we pretend to know it. We just try to adapt ourselves to this. From this viewpoint, this is a form of life we mm, experience fully. But this form of life does not cause or does not favor a growth. Neither Rumelin already said that the Homo economicus, that which should be the highest form of human evolution, instead heralds an anthropological catastrophe, an implosion of the human. And perhaps if we think of the vote cast by uh, the British with the Brexit, may help us understand up to what point, to which point, we are really able to make decisions and about a life we feel familiar with, we feel at ease with. I'm not reading. I hope the interpreter won't have problems. Actually, the narrative of our times is a form of narrative that does not belong to us. But there is a sociologist, Todd. His books date back to quite a long time ago. He compared the narrative developed by the technological society and the situation of individuals to monads living in an atmosphere. They bounce back things, they echo things, but without having any subjectivity, a center that can bestow a meaning upon their experiences. From this viewpoint, the narrative is somehow a narrative that overwhelms us, stuns us, rules us, and somehow creates an atmosphere in which our experience gets fragmented, pulverized. There is an Italian philosopher, Agamben. I'm not referring here to the most famous books of the Italian theory, but rather to one of his earliest books entitled Infancy and History. He questions the mere fact that we still are able to live experience. I don't think that this is the case because probably what happened to people before and after the Second World War, maybe here some of us may have been listening to tales and stories or may have read books in which thinkers and men of letters talked about the world of yesterday that had been lost, thus creating a situation of misery which wouldn't allow to create any possibility of for recovery from the anthropological viewpoint. I don't think that this is the problem, this is the issue. From my viewpoint, I would like to quote another anthropologist, a Neapolitan anthropologist, De Martino, his name. He studied the phenomena that he calls the anthropological catastrophes, those situations in which there is a pulverization, there is a depersonalization, a loss of a center by individuals, a loss in terms of communication and drying up of a form of life, and a mechanical reiteration and repetition, like in a tick or with an echo of words which do not actually belong to individuals who live their experience or talk to each other. Words are just bounced back and echoed by them. Is it possible to talk about experience from my viewpoint? Is it possible to get out of this narrative, which would be called by Marx dehumanizing and catastrophic and alienating? The problem is that just very few attempts have been done to interrupt the flow of this narrative, and very few attempts, and even quite snobbish attempts, to look for another form of narrative. Ultimately, this is what literature has always been doing, and this is my point, my thesis, what art has always done. In the same way as ethics deepens the perspective, takes a deeper look. Let me quote my brother. He said something nice on La Repubblica. He has just said, we all have got eyes, but the art has a look. What does it mean? It means that art portrays landscapes, big pictures. Instead, economy quantifies art. It certainly gives us a deeper perspective. Like here, we can go we can really take a deeper look into the horizon. And this leads us to understand the meaning. The question is, what is the meaning of our life? We would never be able to point one object, one uh, asset that can be quantified. I mean, the meaning is what we try to build, what we try, so to say, to express by our words, on condition that we are able to say everything, that we are able in our conscience to translate the complexities of our psyche that characterize us. So Capri can be so beautiful, but I can tell you that this morning while we were waiting for the bus, it was not that beautiful. So it is probably the context that makes the experience, that builds the experience. It is the context that allows us to grasp the generative and the creative element of experience. But what does aesthetics do, which is done also by ethics? When I think of bioethics, I don't think of the ethical codes of companies. These are sort of ready to make, ready to wear dresses. I mean, the economic narrative tries to get legitimized. If you read them, they are sort of business cards. They do not imply any concrete and real reference to a common commitment to the planet, to common life, to equality, to solidarity, and all that you can imagine. And ethics, actually, if we think of it in the Aristotle's view and perspective, or even in Wittgenstein's view in the his conference on ethics, there are no words to define it. Ethics means that, like in this case, we look around not to go swimming or to do something specific, but there is something miraculous in it. There's the fact that this is a gift we have received from God. This is also ethics. We express it by our own words, and this obliges us to do what Mr. Signorini just said. I mean, forces us to reflect, to think over it. I wanted to show you some videos and some pictures because this would help me to explain my points better. The three pictures I wanted to show you, I think that you all know the painting The Seven Acts of Mercy by Caravaggio. I don't know how many of you know who Banksy is. His last painting is being shown in Naples. Is still preserved and kept in Naples. And then there is another street artist, his name Jorit. He painted some murales, enormous murales, graffiti paintings. And I wanted to show you this enormous image of San Gennaro, our patron saint, but his face portrays a very famous Camorra man. But actually, the face belongs to one of the many guys who walk in the streets of Naples. Now, The Seven Acts of Mercy is a painting which is not kept in a museum, and this is its main characteristic. It stays where it was in the church where it was made for. I mean, Caravaggio portrays mercy, bodies of people who give and receive, faces that somehow represent and depict the main experiences of men: death, suffering, hunger. It is as if it was a picture of human experience. It's a sort of a summary or really, it's not very big. So on top of it, there is a Madonna. There's no God, but there is the Virgin Mary as a mother. with a child, and these images cast their light on these intertwined human bodies, but we must say meaningfully intertwined, the one to the other. Why? Well, because in this picture, Caravaggio depicts cutting out and taking it away from experience, because these faces were real faces probably, and he cuts out one piece. He isolates the detail and gives back to us the possibility to have an experience which is lived through what allows us to turn beauty into one of the most fundamental experiences of sharing. It's one of the main ways in which we build the possibility to feel together in a universal atmosphere above and beyond the differences among us. So it's the common sense, the fact that you can appreciate, you can recognize in Caravaggio, even after so many years. I'm really sorry I can't show you the picture. The ability to understand and grasp the meaning of human life. We all die, we all suffer. Fortunately, not all of us starve to death, but the experience of hunger, we live it. Also, indirectly, via the images that we look at. But the images and pictures that are shown very frequently somehow deaden our sensitivity and our ability to interpret them via this common sense, which is a bottom up experience, precisely the opposite of the top down, globalized experience of economics. But Caravaggio, like many other art places, fits into a spectacular society or an entertainment society, which deprives beauty of the possibility of a different experience, of a common sense experience, watching through different eyes. This is an expression by Leopardi in his Zibaldone. Leopardi said, the poet is the person who looks at the same thing but with different eyes, with a deeper gaze, a gaze that goes deeper into the horizon. For example, the poet asks himself, who gave us this world? Is it the property, or is it the product, or is it something we are responsible for vis-a-vis our children? Well, actually, the economic dimension is not a dimension we can get rid of, but it has turned into a myth, a mythocracy of economy. And it is very difficult to get rid of this myth, so much so that it has invaded the market, the art market. So, economy gets hold of an experience which opens up new perspectives for our growth, for our thinking. Just think of Naples or Rome, uh, these cities, or even Paris, all the big art cities. Uh, what, are, what is the source? What is the cause for the depersonalization that we experience in these cities? We have big historical centers visited by mass tourists, by tourists, that are totally isolated by the rest of the city. Naples, and I'm sorry, but I have to mention something which has something to do with what my brother does. If you look at what has been done in Naples in terms of contemporary art, not directly by him, but actually Naples has become a sort of open air museum, outdoor museum, that has progressively, I mean, thanks to the force and temperament of the Neapolitans, this has not cancelled the identity of Naples totally, but it has really lost any real, actual relationship with everyday life, and it has become a bit like Las Vegas, and the art places become the places of consumption, of consumerism, and they turn into an economic experience. So I now come back to Bansky and the other graffiti artists. And Bansky is the graffiti artist who has made wonderful paintings even in Palestine, in Eastern Europe, in London. He freezes up some moments that are very contradictory in our contemporary life. In Naples, he made a lot of these murales, of these graffiti, but they've been all destroyed. This is the known memory of our city. The only one which is left is a black and white Madonna who holds a gun in her hand. Of course, this is a form of the secretion or a reinterpretation of the sacred, and I go back to De Martino, which is not anymore aimed at aggregating people, but the sacred here is aimed only at implementing different logics that I don't want to specify here. Recently, and this is quite amusing, an antique dealer, but rather a junk shop owner, decided to encase, to frame these murales, and he decided also to cover it with a glass. So he decided that he's the owner of this work by Banksy. Banksy is not is unknown, so nobody knows whether it's true that he gave this present, and it gives us a chance to get a different perception from a work of art. And here I come to the last artist, Jorit. Jorit has painted many murales. This one depicting San Gennaro, and I should recommend you to see it. It has been painted next, close to the San Giorgio Church, and this saint is absolutely far from the sacred image, the icon. The icon of San Gennaro has quite a dull face, the typical face of a mystic looking upward in the heavens. Instead, this San Gennaro has such a strong face with very strong traits, conveying the physiognomical force of Naples. Why am I saying this? Because Jorit has never accepted to hold exhibitions. He's been asked many times to do that, but this is a way to get hold of art again, to reappropriate ourselves of it. Jorit, like Bansky, worked by subtraction. They took something away. For example, they took away the typical iconic face of San Gennaro. San Gennaro works his miracle twice a year. There are some reserved seats to witness it. But I mean, the Neapolitans are so used to San Gennaro that San Gennaro has been deprived of any sacred character. Jorit, by his interpretation, gave back to San Gennaro by taking away his face. He gave back to San Gennaro his popularity, which is not the kitsch popularity of the entertainment society, but rather San Gennaro who can be the reincarnation of a city of Naples which is not isolated, cut out from his social fabric. Now, I cannot give any answer to your questions. Ethics is a moral imperative and a moral questioning that can be useful for our experience to the extent that we share our questioning and we collaborate for the good, which is not the common good, which is an abused word, but which is a goodness which lies in the fact that we preserve the common life, which is not the life of an individual or of our relatives or friends, but it is the life of the humankind which will come, of the generations to come.